Hello everyone, welcome back to the Hindu Explainer series. I am Kushagra Goel and very warm greetings from Law Prep Tutorial. Now, regarding the dispute about the Rafale corruption, alright, so see, first things, yesterday it was related to a report about alleged corruption that has taken place on part of Dassault Aviation, which makes the aircrafts, and DEF SYS, alright, so which is the Indian company receiving offset contract on behalf of Dassault Aviation, alright. So this is the main thing that is now in news. However, a question regarding the Rafale aircraft has already come in CLAT 2020. That question was principally about the aircraft itself. What is the aircraft? Who makes it? What are the missiles? What is unique about the aircraft? So for that, you need a little bit more in-depth analysis. The confusion regarding this should be separated on what kinds of things are discussed in each heading. So the CLAT 2020 examination was primarily about the Rafale aircraft itself. The report that we did an in-depth analysis yesterday was about the alleged corruption that has taken place, alright. The Supreme Court judgment was between both these concepts. It did not deal with any corruption that took place. It only was to see whether the procedure for procuring weapons was followed or not, alright. So therefore, you need to know one thing. First, this was a government to government deal. Indian government bought 36 Rafale aircrafts from the French government. Who is making those aircraft for the French government, which will be supplied to India? Dassault Aviation. But the corruption case is related to the payment that Dassault Aviation has received, and then it has paid back to these companies allegedly for bribes. The disclosure is that they have supplied or received in return 50 models of the Rafale aircraft itself. But those models are nowhere to be found, and that is the question that now needs inquiry. Another doubt that students had was primarily regarding the Nobel Prizes itself. So on December 10, when Nobel Prizes are usually dispersed or granted, the ceremony takes place. It is on that day that we did a detailed in-depth analysis of all the Nobel Prizes. So for those who have doubts about the Nobel Prizes, please go and watch the December 10 video of our series. Following up, a lot of you have been asking me to make a video about important topics that need to be covered for current affairs. So I promise you I will be doing that too. So on that note, I begin with today's newspaper. So on the front page, on the left hand side, as polling closed, the report about whether polling was peaceful or not is on the left hand side, and the overall turnout of vote. It is positive news that in most of the states, the voting turnout was above 75%, and in some states the turnout was up to 87%, but in certain places the turnout has also been low. For example, in Tamil Nadu, in Velachery, the turnout was a mere 37% of the people who were registered to vote came to vote, alright. Then on the left hand side, curfews, night curfew has been imposed in the city of Delhi. Why? Because coronavirus cases are rising. India today reported the highest number of cases it has reported till now, which is 1,16,000 new coronavirus cases. So that shows the alarmity of the situation. But in response to that, the government has stated that there is still no plan to actually provide vaccines to all adults, that is everyone above the age of 18. A suggestion for the same was put forward by the Chief Minister of Delhi. A similar suggestion was also put forward by the Chief Minister of Maharashtra. He stated that everyone above the age of 25 should be vaccinated so that we can tide over this at a faster pace, but that has also not been permitted. Nevertheless, the more important news on the left hand side, it is about Justice N.V. Ramana, who has now been confirmed to be appointed as the next Chief Justice of India. He will take oath on 24th April and will be the 48th Chief Justice of India. He'll be taking over from Justice Bobde. On the left hand side is the constitutional aspect regarding this, that under Article 124 Clause 2 of the Constitution, the President exercises his right to confirm the appointment of the Chief Justice of India. Alright, so that is news. A little bit of history of Justice N.V. Ramana we have already covered. Nevertheless, it is provided here altogether once again. Then on the left hand side, vigilance officers to be transferred every 3 years. So now what is the Central Vigilance Commission? It is a statutory body that was created earlier as an executive body and then through a parliamentary law confirmed as a statutory body in 2003-4. Alright. So Central Vigilance Commission's purpose is to ensure or keep a check on activities of its own government employees, and in that regard now a modified rule has come regarding how long you can be posted at a particular place or office, that is 3 years. So one thing that needs to be noted down is the status of Central Vigilance Commission, which is a statutory body. Then on the second news here is Russia calls for inclusive solution to Afghan crisis. Now we yesterday noted down that the Foreign Minister of Russia will be meeting External Affairs Minister Subramanyam Jaishankar, and the talks did take place. The most important discussion regarding this was related to the Afghan peace process, where both the parties reiterated that it should include all parties of Afghanistan. One critical aspect of this from the statement issued by the Russian foreign minister was also that, see, Taliban is a movement of the people of Afghanistan and therefore it cannot be discounted, completely disregarded. So you need to have security apparatus to ensure that this happens, that it is not used as a methodology for perpetuating terrorism or violence in other countries. However, at the same time, you cannot keep it out. One thing that was sidestepped in this conversation was regarding the delivery of S-400 missile system. No concrete answers were given about when the delivery will begin. However, Russian Foreign Minister did confirm that further manufacturing of Russian military equipments will take place under the Make in India scheme. Now, that is something that needs to be kept in mind, and what will be manufactured could become an important topic. But no details about that have been revealed as of now. So turning to the other national news, nothing of note here regarding rise of coronavirus cases. So turning to the editorial front. On the editorial front today, there is a lot of content that you need to analyze and make a note of. So on the left hand side, the editorial fits and starts. This is related to the conversation of peace process between India and Pakistan, that the start-stop things that keep happening in Pakistan. Why is this? That it all started with the ceasefire agreement, then customary tweet sharing between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Prime Minister of Pakistan, where they shared concerns about their health of each other. Then it was regarding the Indus Water Treaty talks that also took place. However, despite the Pakistan's military apparatus calling for geo-economics or calling for overall peace to focus on the economy of Pakistan, a measure that was proposed by the Prime Minister himself was shot down by his very own cabinet. That was to permit import of cotton and sugar from India. And that is something that has then again led to a stoppage in the conversation between India and Pakistan. That it is like 2 steps ahead, 1 step backward. So that is the scenario between India and Pakistan on the peace side. Now the demand of Pakistan is nothing can be normalized till the situation in Kashmir is revoked or reverted back to 2019 or prior to that. Now we know that such a situation is untenable, is impossible to actually be discussed, and therefore this is reaching an impasse. What the editorial then talks about is how these concerns should be addressed through further back channel conversations, and how such problems or roadblocks should be covered through further back channel conversation to have normalization of relationship between the two countries. Then moving on the left hand side, mayhem in Myanmar, that this is in light of both India and China and other Asian countries now issuing statements for reversal to democracy, suppression of violence, violence not being permissible. This is ramping up the pressure on the junta in Myanmar to state that, see, killing people or trying to suppress the protest is not going to work in the long term. You actually, now the situation on ground has changed. You have to recognize that democratic aspirations cannot be completely suppressed anymore, and a middle ground should be reached, wherein the military generals do not want to give up power. However, they cannot retain power through force. And that is what the situation, or is the call that the democratic process should be restarted in Myanmar, and this suppression should not carry on any more. Alright, so then on the other two main editorials, the first one written by former security advisor NSA M.K. Narayanan is about the stamp out the canker thwarting democracy. This is regarding the overall situation of India's democracy in general and how a people's movement should be kept in light. Why? Because if we see, as per the editorial, the case is that, see, if we see the overall political scenario, less issues and policies are discussed and more the space is about personal image and how an individual govern, and that in light reduces the overall democracy in this situation. And then additionally, it also talks about the overall geopolitical scenario in general. So this editorial space that is regularly written by M.K. Narayanan is always an overview of what has happened till the previous editorial has been written. So this is like a quick summary of what is happening in the national news and how it should be looked on from a third person perspective. This gives you all a general understanding of what the overall scenario in the country is. But turning to the other editorial that has far more information for all of us, which is reworking the net zero for climate justice. What is this net zero concept? This is about carbon neutrality, or being countries, their carbon emissions being at the same level as to the level that the earth can capture back, that you don't have higher, or your carbon emissions should not cause further damage to nature. We all know under climate change 1.5 degrees Celsius is the target. But what are the concerns with climate change or the climate justice apparatus is what this editorial discusses. So first things first, the first problem is the inherent inequality that the treaties talk about. So India in aggregate has the third largest emissions in the world. However, on a per capita basis, India's carbon emissions are a third to the global average, which is that India's overall contribution to carbon emissions is a mere 3% in comparison to United States, who has 26, and China, which has 13. US population is 1/3 to that of other countries, and it is a country that has only 300 million people in comparison to 1.30 billion people that live in India, and yet their carbon emissions are far higher than India. And despite that, the overall need or the inherent inequality that this editorial talks about is to ask India to also reduce its carbon emission at the same pace as US is doing. Why is it unequal? It is because far few people are emitting far more in comparison to India, which is not only a developing country, but is also has a very low number of middle classes and a large number of poor people, and to uplift them you need to have infrastructure, and infrastructure contributes to a far higher number of carbon emission, because for example you need to build houses for people, you need to build basic roads for access, you need to build schools, and to build all of that you need material that is not per se carbon neutral, for example, or renewable energy, for example cement, any other building material that you also can talk about, all of them are not renewable energy sources, and therefore they will amount to some amount of emission. However, those emissions are basic necessity of India, but those expenditure by other countries, for example US and China, is dispensable for them. The second problem is the diplomatic history of carbon negotiations shows that long-term goals without strategy to achieve them is a case of finance and technology solve the political problem and not the problem itself. What does this statement mean? That when we have these climate treaties, for example, Donald Trump, when he was president, got US out of the climate Paris Accord. Joe Biden got US back into it. So that solved the political problem of US wanting to commit to climate change in general. But does that solve the problem of climate change itself? No. Has overall carbon emissions of US immediately reduced in light of US joining the Paris Accord? No. Has US contributed to far higher number of technology transfer to developing countries so that they can also turn towards more carbon neutral technology? That has also not happened. So this statement talks about this problem, that such treaties address the political side of it but does not solve the problem of climate change in general. And lastly, it also an example of all of this injustice is made through coal. So coal and crude oil are two non-renewable energy sources that cause a lot of carbon emissions. World is moving away from coal. But the reason why they are doing so is also rooted in their internal domestic economies. Why? Because coal is a resource that they don't have anymore, or they have exhausted their coal reserves. India, at the other hand, has humongous amount of coal reserves which are underutilized. India instead wants to reduce crude oil consumption for electrical purposes or overall utility, because crude oil is something we don't possess and we have to invest far more of our foreign exchange to buy crude oil. Now, treaties across the world or countries across the world want the world economies to stop using coal. But that is what exactly is the injustice that is being meted out to India here. What we need to know or understand is this inherent problems of climate change that this editorial talks about, right? Another internal topic or related to this is to talk about the passages that have climate change policies or questions regarding that. We have already discussed the NDC contributions of India, which are nationally determined contribution to limiting climate change. Now, a link to that where we have discussed that will be provided in the description box. So do your revision about that topic from there. This is the other side of the debate of how the Paris Agreement or any other climate agreements that we have been talking about are inherently problematic from the perspective of India. If you have any further doubts after revising the NDCs, feel free to put it in the comment section. Turning to the op-eds, the left-hand side one, a start to a more authoritarian era. This is analyzing the situation in Hong Kong. We have already discussed the changes that have been made in Hong Kong. Two different specific terms of Chinese language are discussed here to talk about democracy. That how democracy in Hong Kong was always a sham. That, for example, prior to Britain relinquishing control of Hong Kong, the appointment to the one governor of Hong Kong was also by the British people and not by the citizens of Hong Kong. So there was no real democracy. Similar to how in India when it was colonized, the governor general or the viceroy was not one decided by the Indian people. Democracy is when those who govern us are selected by the people themselves. So prior to independence from Britain, democracy didn't exist on that level. Now moving on from that is the concept of Manzhu, which is that on their own the people are able to govern themselves. All right, so that concept is one. So this passage here, which talks about the concept, is expressed as a pair of characteristics that are commonly rendered in English as democracy. So what stands for democracy in Chinese language is what this paragraph explains. In Cantonese, which is a word for the Chinese language, the characters are pronounced Manzhu, and on their own they mean people and rule. Manzhu suggests a system in which those who zhu, that is those who rule, listen to and provide for the man. So Manzhu is a place where those who govern, those are rulers or zhu, listen to the people and then govern. But did that actually exist in Hong Kong? No. Why? Because even prior to the changes in Hong Kong, the basic laws of Hong Kong, which is the closest concept they have to constitution. So one thing to be noted down, that Hong Kong also does not have its own constitution. It just has a rule of basic laws. In that, the assembly in which the seats for directly elected people has been reduced further from 35 to 20. In that, those members who elected these people were also pro-Beijing and at the head. So this past Sunday we had a profile about Carrie Lam. Carrie Lam is the head or the chief executive of Hong Kong. Her appointment or the chief executive's appointment is also by 1,500 appointees or nominees who select this person. All of them are actually appointed somehow or the other by the Communist Party of China. So the LegCo or the Legislative Council only has one power to regulate this chief executive, which was to remove her and get someone else appointed when budgetary allocations or any other major bills are unable to be passed. What that shows is that the chief executive has lost the support of the LegCo. It is now in this regard that the LegCo has lost its democratic status. That first there was a 50-50 chance, 50% appointees, that is 35 members, were appointed by the Communist Party of China, 35 were directly elected. That number, the total size of the council has been increased to 90 from 70. However, the elected people has been reduced from 35 to 20. And at the same time, the Election Commission will now have a negative list. That is, who among these 20 can actually run for office will also be determined on their level of patriotism towards China and the Communist Party of China. It is these two changes that have actually reduced democracy completely in Hong Kong. All right. So that is what the situation in Hong Kong is. It is one of the most important topics in current affairs. It has featured throughout the time. China's actions is something that is very much part of your current affairs preparation. So make sure you make your notes about this. Then on the left hand side, redefining combatants. This is editorial is a little more towards the international law and at the same time discusses cyber attacks. When, for example, you have a war between India or Pakistan or any other country, the combatants or war is the concept where what is the rights a country has when someone else or some other country attacks them. How do you determine that it is an action of use of force or war, which is a violation of sovereignty under the UN Charter? So one of them, firstly, is the concept of combatants. That combatants or soldiers, that this person belonged to a particular country and the action was actually to take away my territory. How do you explain this? So on official side, India and Pakistan have only fought two proper wars, 1965 and 1971. The Kargil conflict and the conflict in 1948 is not called a proper war. Why? Because in Kargil, Pakistan's military denied that those who occupied the heights in Kargil were actually soldiers of Pakistan. Indian side claimed that they were soldiers of Pakistan. Similarly, in 1948, Pakistan claimed those people were not soldiers of Pakistan or Pakistan's army, but were actually tribal warriors themselves, that they did it on their own. So those two events, that is of 1948 and 1999, are not called a real war between India and Pakistan. Only 65 and 71 conflict is called a real war. The differentiation lies in this concept of combatants. How are they defined? In 1899 Hague Convention. So three characteristics. First, the force should be commanded by a person responsible for his subordinates. So note this down, that in 1948 and in 1999, Pakistan's military claimed that these people were not commanded by the Pakistan's forces. Second, it must have a distinctive emblem recognizable at a distance. The people who were captured or whose dead bodies were found in Kargil heights were not wearing the official uniform of the Pakistani soldiers. They have a distinct uniform. So that is how it was also claimed that they were not real soldiers of the Pakistan's army. And thirdly, it must carry arms openly, and lastly conduct operations in accordance with laws and customs of war. Both these characteristics, that you have to follow international law in the sense that you cannot attack civilian areas, civilian targets, civilian facilities, and also treat the other side fairly. If in case there is an injured person, you let the forces carry them. If there are official dead bodies, you let the armed forces take them back. This was unique in the sense during the Kargil war, the dead bodies were never taken back by the Pakistani forces because they claimed they were not members of the Pakistani forces. But if you rewind your memory to last year in the clash of Galwan Valley, both India and China counted their deaths and took back the dead bodies. So that is the recognition that these people are official combatants of each army. Now, why are we talking about this? Is because in light of cyber attacks, how do you claim that this was a real attempt by another country to attack someone else? So India, or a report in USA, claimed that these attacks were carried out by China to target India, but those were speculative. One, they were not recognized by Chinese military, and secondly, in case that is to be the scenario that someone has actually claimed attack, then you can retaliate or act in self-defense. A similar example of self-defense was, why did India carry out the Balakot airstrikes or the surgical strikes in Uri? So those were, or why were they not called an act of war on behalf of India, was because they were act of self-defense. Preemptive self-defense, that you know that this part of territory in Balakot was being used to train militants to attack India, and therefore India bombed those areas to prevent such an attack from taking place. Those are permissible preemptive self-defense that sovereign countries can exercise. That is something that is distinctively provided in UN Charter. But in cyber attacks, that is something that is absent. And therefore, the editorial then calls that we need to redefine combatants, because cyber attacks do not require one official soldiers. Civilians can also do it. You only need to either create a software, or a person on his own will can also do it. For example, I sitting in my room could also do it. Now, the problem of why we haven't defined it yet and what problems it can lead to is this, that if countries retaliate or there is no rules to regulate cyber attacks, we know that the next frontier of war, something that Rajnath Singh, our defense minister, recently pointed out when he was gave a recent speech was that you need these technologies to actually fight the wars of the future. And if we are unprepared, our enemies will take us for a ride. And therefore, if this area remains unregulated, it could affect the national security of different countries, or retaliation of this could lead to harms on all the sides, or humanity in general will be at loss. The purpose of UN or the creation of UN was to avoid hot wars, and if cyber attacks remain unregulated, the purpose of United Nations is also at threat. So this is the theme that this editorial is talking about. All right, so what all do you need to know is the concept of preemptive self-defense. Secondly, how do you identify who is a combatant or who is fighting for whom? And lastly, how cyber attacks remain unregulated or undefined as to how you can retaliate for them. Another thing on this op-ed is the concept of opinio juris here. So opinio juris is basically an example of this is you drive your car in India on the left hand side. Why do we naturally do it? Or when we drive on the right hand side of the road, we believe that we are driving on the wrong side. Why? Because it is part of opinio juris. Our action is governed in our belief that there is a legal obligation to carry out something in similar manner. Opinio juris is, for example, I will not break the screen because I know that there is a legal obligation on me to respect the property of someone else. Or I will not go and bash you up just because I believe that you are incorrect. Is because I believe there is a legal obligation on everyone to not use physical force. That obligation, when an action is done or not done by someone based on their internal belief that it will be illegal to do it, is known as opinio juris. All right, so this is international law, something that is related to the events in cyber warfare and thus needed to be understood. Then further, the next one is about politics and the situation in West Bengal. Not relevant for us. The data point talks about the higher number of deaths that are now also taking place with the second wave. Turning to the other national news on this front, nothing of real note. Following up from the front page regarding the conversation between foreign ministers. All right, in that regard, this is confirmation that the groupings of India is we are interested in inclusive cooperations which is for something and not against somebody. This is reiterating the same words India used when the Quad summit was talked about or it took place, that Quad stands for something. What is that? Rule of law, international cooperation, COVID response, climate change. It is not a counter to any one particular country, and that is what was clarified by India to Russia also. That our purpose of getting into Quad is not to counter China, but actually to have cooperation for certain other things. Then turning to the other national news, more about the elections itself. Then daily count, the highest in the world, that India is now reporting the highest number of cases across the globe. And then moving on here, India has US as an ally in fighting climate change. This is John Kerry. He is also on a visit, 4-day visit to New Delhi to prepare the groundwork for the climate summit that US will be hosting virtually. In that regard, he has reiterated the claim that India has US as an ally to fight climate change. Why do these words matter? Because under Donald Trump, US stopped the aid or financial assistance to India to turn to more carbon neutral or less carbon emitting technologies. So the funding to get from a carbon emitting technology to a more carbon efficient one. So those changes, or for example, when we are now moving or creating more electric vehicles, so we need to have more stations where we can charge those vehicles. You need infrastructure for that. To build that infrastructure, you need money, and it is that financial assistance that was stopped by Donald Trump, and it is a signal that probably that will now be renewed. Then turning towards the international news, so big event about revival of talks between US and Iran regarding the Iran nuclear deal, or the JCPOA. So all the envoys regarding, or the negotiators, are now parking in Vienna. No direct mediation is taking place. However, the other Western countries, Germany, France, UK, Russia and China, are the interlocutors to resolve the conflict between Iran and USA. So we need to wait. Hopefully it will get resolved, which will be a win-win for everyone across the globe. Then on the left hand side, plot twist on Jordan, that the Prince Hamza has now stated that, see, his loyalty is towards the king of Jordan, which is King Abdullah II, and his remarks are to be seen in good light for criticism, but he is not going to have a coup or is planning anything like that. So this is probably peace returning in Jordan, or the recent blip that was seen. Then in that regard, Israel has once again turned towards Benjamin Netanyahu. So it seems that his immunity for trials for corruption will carry on for the next 6 months if he is able to form a government in Israel. So once again, no party was able to get the majority in the Knesset. The Knesset is the official parliament of Israel. Just like we have the Sansad for our parliament, the Knesset is the official parliament of Israel. You need 61 members in that, and his party has also not been able to get that many numbers. But it needs to be seen whether he is able to get the support of outside support for his coalition to run the government, whether that will last or not. In past 2 years, 4 elections have already taken place and the government has not lasted. So we need to see how this goes on. Then here, the news that Ukraine urges NATO to speed up its membership. NATO is a military grouping, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which means attack on one is an attack on all. So it is a military alliance, military security alliance to ensure security to the member nations. The creation of NATO was in response to USSR's rising influence, or to contain communism. And Ukraine is also someone who is on the firing end of secessionist Russian militias. And membership to NATO would guarantee its support from Western countries to counter Russia, which already annexed part of its territory in 2014. So we need to wait for this. And then more and more updates about Myanmar. The protests are carrying on. No abate or no limit on that. Then on the economic and sporting news, nothing of real note. Anticipation for the IPL. So that is it for the day. Thank you so much. And take care of yourselves as cases are rising. Most important, do revise the NDC of India, something that we have discussed. And if you have any doubts about the Hong Kong dispute, or opinio juris and cyber attacks, or the definition of combatants, do ask in the comment section. On that note, thank you so much and take care of yourselves. See you all tomorrow.